Good evening. I'm Kirsha Hughes-Scandies, a member of the League of Women Voters of Juneau. Welcome to the second of two nights of the 2023 City and Borough of Juneau Municipal Candidates Forum. Many thanks to our partners, KTOO, Juneau Empire, and KINY for making this event possible and providing it live on their stations and websites. We are hosting tonight's event from the KTOO studios on Lingat Ani. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization which encourages informed and active civic participation. One of the ways we do that is to organize this candidate forum to help Juneau voters make informed decisions. This year's candidate forum is divided into two parts. Tonight we will hear from the school board candidates, and we'll also hear from Rory Watt and David Ignell on the ballot measure. And if you missed yesterday's forum with the assembly candidates, it is available to watch on any of the partner websites. Gunal Sheesh.
Hello and welcome to night two of the Juneau League of Women's Voters 2023 Candidate Forum. I'm Clarice Larson, a reporter with the Juneau Empire.
I'm Jordan Lewis, news director for KNY News of the North.
And I'm Katie Anastas, reporter for KTOO.
This forum is airing live on KTOO 104.3 and 91.7 FM and KINY AM 894.9 FM. You can also watch on KTOO.org, JuneauEmpire.com, KINYRadio.com, and JuneauLWV.org. You can find a recording of all of those websites later on as well.
Since 2020, Juneau has conducted local elections by mail. Ballots will be mailed to registered voters tomorrow and should be arriving in mailboxes soon. After voting, there are 3 ways to get your ballots back to election officials. You can drop them in the mail with postage, but please note the city encourages getting the post office to hand cancel that postage with a legible date on the postmark.
Ballots can also be placed in secure drop boxes that will be available 24 hours a day beginning Friday. There will be one drop box available at the Douglas Library and one at the Statter Harbor Boat Launch. Starting Monday, ballots can also be delivered in person to vote centers at City Hall and the Mendenhall Valley Public Library during business hours. You can also vote in person at both locations up through Election Day on October 3rd. You can find more information, including how to apply for an absentee ballot, on juneau.org/elections.
Tonight we'll hear from 2 candidates for Juneau School Board, followed by a discussion on the new City Hall ballot measure. There are 2 open seats on the school board this year. Both seats are for 3-year terms. Paige Siponiski was not available to join us tonight, but is also running. We'll follow a similar format to what we had for the assembly candidates last night. Each candidates have 1 minute to give their opening statement. We'll then alternate back and forth asking questions, with the candidates will have 1 minute to respond. We will end with 1 minute closing statements for each candidate. We'll start with Brittany Chioni. Hayward, you have 1 minute.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me this evening. I do want to start by saying condolences to Mary Patola and her family for their loss today. I am excited to be participating in this process, and I look forward to being able to serve if elected. I wanted to give just a little bit of brief background about myself. I moved to Juneau in 2006. And worked at the University of Alaska Southeast for about 4 years as a term professor in economics. I have also then held a number of different positions with the state of Alaska, including the Director of Economic Development, my current position as an Administrative Operations Manager. I've also returned to UAS and I adjunct online courses through UAS Ketchikan. I currently serve as the chair of the Juneau Community Charter School APC, which is their governing board, and I have 1 son in the school district who is a 6th grader.
Thank you, Brittany. David Noon, please go ahead.
Well, also thanks to everybody who's been involved in organizing this and moderating as well. And thanks to Brittany for running. I've known Brittany for 17 years now, and if there were only 1 seat in the race, I would totally be voting for her. But fortunately, there are 2, and I've been in Juneau for quite a long time, 21 years now. I've been teaching American history at the University of Alaska Southeast since I moved here. I have 2 kids in the school district, a senior and a freshman, both at Thunder Mountain. And over the years, I've considered running for school board. It's been something I've pondered. I've had a lot of experience as a parent and as a partner with the school district. And it's gotten to the point now in my career at UAS where I've got some time that is available to me after serving a number of years in university governance. I've got quite a bit of experience working through some difficult times, which we face in the district as well.
Thank you, David. Now for questions, Jordan Lewis with KINY will start us off.
We will start with David Noon. What have you done to get to know the Juneau School District in preparation for running? You have 1 minute.
I was very fortunate because of my job. I had an extremely flexible teaching schedule when my kids were really young. So I spent a lot of time at Harborview when both my kids were making their way through. I spent a couple of years chairing the site council at Harborview and working with the school board, particularly on issues like lowering the pupil to teacher ratio. So that's something that's been just kind of a fundamental experience of mine as a parent. I've also, through the university, had a number of students over the years who have made their way through our various programs and are teaching in the district. I have a number of former students at most of the schools around here. And so, I'm familiar as well with the process of teacher training, and I know how talented our potential labor force is out there, and I think recruiting and retaining those teachers is an important goal for the board.
Thank you, David. Brittany, you have 1 minute.
Thank you so much. So as I had mentioned, I have served on the Juneau Community Charter School Board. I have been on the board, this is my 5th year. I have served 2 terms, and I'm currently in the middle of a term as president of that board. I have been fortunate enough in that role to also receive the AASB, or the Alaska Association of School Boards, excuse me for the acronym, training. In that role as the chair, I have had interaction with both the board and district members in working through a number of different issues, from personnel to we have a contract renewal. I've presented to the board as well. I've also worked on a kind of parent support group to work to lower the rally costs when that was an issue about a year or 2 ago. And so again, it's Juneau, have a number of friends very close that work for the district.
Thank you, Brittany. KTOO's Katie Anastas has the next question.
We'll start with Brittany. If the state continues to flat fund public education and enrollment continues to decrease, what do you see as viable options for balancing the district's budget? You have 1 minute.
Thank you. I think this is probably one of the most important issues that we currently face. If you look at the Bureau of Economic Analysis, it's about $1,300, and that was back during session that I did that calculation. It's probably a little more now, to what we should have received in additional funding for that base student allocation. I think it's imperative that the state step up. If we don't start seeing that, then yes, we probably do have to start looking at consolidation, although the math on a consolidation of schools is really difficult and not very straightforward. I think, unfortunately, we would probably see class sizes increase, and I think that that's kind of a terrible route. But personnel costs usually are typically the highest costs. I think it would be good to look at maybe getting some creative solutions. If we could look at doing something along increasing a child care or pre-K, we know that there's great benefits to those programs.
Thank you, Brittany. David, you have 1 minute.
Yeah, it's completely inadequate, the state's level of support over the past years. As Brittany points out, we're roughly half where we should be in terms of the BSA. So one-time increases that are vulnerable to gubernatorial vetoes is not an acceptable way to move forward. We need timely, predictable, and adequate funding. That's a constitutional obligation that the legislature and our political leadership has failed to sort of achieve. So as a member of the school board, obviously advocacy is going to be an important goal of mine. And as Brittany points out, there aren't going to be any easy solutions to closing these gaps. If most of our budget consists of personnel, and most of that personnel cost is frontline classroom education, it's going to impact kids if we have to start shedding staff and teachers.
Thank you, David. Clarice Larson from the Empire has the next question.
We'll start with David this time. How do you feel about non-public school access to public education funding? You have 1 minute.
Oh, that's a good question. Parents who choose not to have their kids in the public schools, kids who are not in the public schools, they are still part of the public. They're still part of our community. This is not an issue that I've studied in a whole lot of detail, but I think that it's important that, as a district, as a board, we maintain an attitude of openness and generosity toward everyone in our community, starting with the students and sort of building out from there. So I'm not of the mindset to sort of close off access to those kinds of resources. But again, it's not something I've spent an enormous amount of time looking into. My orientation is that I don't have the answers to everything at this point. I mean, I've got my skills, I've got my liabilities. I'm someone who's capable of looking at complex issues and asking the right questions to people who can lead us to good answers.
All right, thank you, David. Brittany, you have 1 minute.
Could you repeat the question for me,
Yeah.
please?
How do you feel about non-public school access to public education funding?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I agree. So I think that there can be kind of benefits and cost to most everything. So I agree with David in that, everyone's part of the public, and there could be things that change in those families' lives that might bring them back into the school district. I currently my child is in, and I serve for the charter school, which is an optional program. And then, we can sometimes attract those families back into the school district where we have a different set of curriculum and have a bit more of that family engagement that people might be wanting to look for. I think that there's lots of ways as a public service that we should be serving the public, and that would include those families that are homeschooling outside of the school district or private schooling as well.
Thank you, Brittany. Joran Lewis has the next question.
Considering the increasing demands on academic classroom time, would you support the development of civics education and engagement for students in K through 12 within the Juneau School District? We'll start with you, Brittany. You have 1 minute.
Thank you so much. Yes, I've actually been having a conversation with a community member about this. I think that civics education is vitally important. I think that we are seeing some of the civil discourse taking place currently, probably because we have lost some of that in many of our public education institutions. So I think that it's important that we understand how the process works, what that looks like, that we can name all three branches of government. I think that, I think it's important to do it probably at like the K through 12 level as well. I think that it's important that we also teach, we are seeing this in other countries, but looking through and knowing how to deal with social media and disinformation, and I believe that could all be wrapped into a civics kind of course. Thank you.
Thank you, Brittany. Now, David, you have 1 minute.
Yeah, I look at this in part as an extension of student activities. I mean, students, the activities they're involved with outside of the classroom are, for many of them, an important lifeline and as a way of kind of, getting involved in, their communities as part of their kind of developing their social intelligence. I think, civics as an academic subject is important. I mean, I'm an historian, so I have a bias in favor of people knowing things about the various worlds around them and the institutions to which they come into contact. I think civics education is not only important for students, but I think it's important for parents and families. I think that there's a lot of misinformation out there about how government works. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about what the roles and responsibilities of the school board are. And I think that it would be useful for students as well as parents to become more educated and informed and involved about the kinds of institutions that we live in.
Thank you. Katie Anastas has the next question.
What are a couple of existing programs that our district should be proud of? We'll start with David. You have 1 minute.
I'm very, biased in favor of, say, drama, debate, and forensics. I have a daughter who's very heavily involved in that. And one thing that I notice as my kids have been involved in various activities is the amount of time and effort that the staff and teachers who supervise and lead those activities engage in. They're not heavily compensated for their time. Often, I would suspect that they wind up in a kind of net sort of deficit. They're paying to be involved in these kinds of things. So I'm particularly proud of the folks who run the DDF team, the combined team out at Thunder Mountain. I think that some work that's going on in our elementary schools in terms of Tlingit immersion, very important part of our community in Juneau as well as Southeast Alaska as a whole. So those are two that I think are definitely worth name checking.
Thank you, David. Brittany, you have 1 minute.
Thank you. I mentioned it earlier, but I think that the rally program is incredibly important unless we're going to match a school day with a work day, which I don't think is actually feasible. That program has served this community well, and I would like to see it continue. I think that also there's been some integration with See Alaska into the schools for art projects. I know that my child has been fortunate enough to participate in a dance kind of setup where they also then bring in the parents as an exhibition, and then also making drums last year. And then I think finally, I think that the sports activities are incredibly important for youth, and not in a competitive way necessarily, but in a way to develop those skills in teamwork and being part of a team and working together.
Thank you. Clarice Larson has the next question.
What measures can be implemented to ensure that all voices in Juneau's ethnically diverse population be heard equally in discussions of public education? Brittany, we'll start with you. You have 1 minute.
Thank you so much. I mean, I think it's important for to work with external partners at the board and administration level in that, we have lots of community groups that I think can lend valuable input. I think it's important for those groups also, it's kind of a two-way street, to be engaged with the board and with the administration as well. And so having that kind of diverse input as we're, making decisions and looking at things. If we're looking and discussing at curriculum, I think that having a very place-based and diverse curriculum is vitally important as well. We need to be able to see ourselves in both leaders, particularly for children, that they see themselves represented in those leadership roles and in that development piece.
Thank you, Brittany. David, it's your turn. You have 1 minute.
Yeah, thanks. It's a great question, and it speaks to all of the core elements of the school board's mission, promoting partnerships within the community, focusing on building relationships, not only within the schools, but in the community as a whole, abiding by the principles of equity in terms of access to school resources, and all of this, of course, being focused on student achievement. I mean, that's the ultimate goal of the district, is to promote achievement so that we support our kids and prepare them for a future in which, they're going to be living in communities that are diverse in all kinds of different ways. Curriculum-wise, I think that, one of the goals of the board is transparency, making sure that parents and students have resources to understand how these curricular decisions are being made. And there's always improvements to be tailored, but I think that the orientation of the board is strong.
Thank you, David. I'll hand it over to Katie Anastas for the next questions.
Within the current budget climate, what should be done to increase recruitment of quality teachers, provide adequate continuing education, and retain qualified teachers in the Juneau School District? David, we'll start with you. You have 1 minute.
It's absolutely impossible to recruit and retain teachers if they're living in a kind of budgetary environment where they're not receiving regular pay increases, where, as we see at the moment, we've got roughly a quarter of our teachers in the district who are teaching outside of their field. We have teachers who are selling their prep time because they can't staff vital courses for students to get through to graduation. So as I said earlier, the situation is absolutely unacceptable. It's scandalous. And I think that, if we're going to resolve the recruitment and retention crisis, we have to start by holding our legislators and lawmakers accountable. This is upward accountability. We can't continue to allow this kind of year in, year out uncertainty to prevail. It's not good for our students, and it's not good for the people who educate them.
Thank you, David. Brittany, you have 1 minute.
Ditto. On that, yes, there actually is a new study that just came out by the RAND Corporation, and I actually heard it on KTOO on Marketplace, but 66% of teachers think that their base salary is inadequate. That's compared to 39% of just all working adults. And it's about a $17,000 desired increase in salary. And I completely agree that it's unacceptable. We don't pay teachers very well in this country. I don't understand why we don't value their services when they're basically educating the most precious things in our lives. I think also the additional tasks are starting to add up. I've heard from teachers that it's not necessarily the teaching that is the problem, but having to deal with other things on top of that that just keep getting added on, and they're not compensated for most of the time that they work.
Thank you, Brittany. This is our final question. How do you think our teachers can best prepare children for lives beyond 2050, when first graders will be approaching middle age and maybe running for school board themselves? Brittany, we'll start with you. You have 1 minute.
Thank you so much for this question. One of the things that I've talked about that's on my website and all of that is about 21st century skills and making sure that we're preparing students for the future. I have worked in the economic development space, and I understand how critical a solid education is for workforce development. The amount of disruptive technology that is currently in our lives is going to change the workplace. Everybody has to get used to being experts at prompting AI, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. So I think that, in one of my things in running for the board is that I like to work on the current problems, but keeping an eye on the future. And I think that teachers have to do the same. We all have to do that so that we're preparing the children of today for the workforce of tomorrow. And really, our high schoolers are going to encounter it really soon.
Thank you, Brittany. David, you have 1 minute.
This gets back to the last question, continuing education. As I mentioned at the start, I've been teaching at the university for 21 years. My career is now older than most of my students. That's also the case for a lot of the teachers in our district. And given all the time constraints that Brittany alluded to in her last response, our teachers are pretty stretched beyond the breaking point as it is. And so I think that if we focus on getting adequate funding for our schooling, creating an environment which we can recruit and retain teachers, part of that is going to be providing them with the resources they need for continuing education so that they can do all this stuff that those of us who are old don't know how to do. My kids are much more adept at certain things than I am, and that's frightening and scary. But I'm willing to learn.
Thank you. That's all for the questions. Candidates now have 1 minute each to give their closing statements. We'll start with David. You have 1 minute.
Yeah, I think as I've thought about the themes that I return to over and over in conversations with people in various forums and things that I write about, with respect to this race, I come down to a number of kind of ideas and mantras that I've alluded to a number of times already. One is obviously the funding. We need timely, predictable, and adequate funding in order to recruit and retain the best educators that we have. Alaska is a great place. Juneau is a wonderful community. We need to have a school district that is adequate to the attraction and the allure that this place offers. We need as well to be very mindful as a board to what our responsibilities are. We have to trust our educators. We can't micromanage them. We can't get involved with things that are best left to the supervisors and the teachers.
Thank you, David. Brittany, you have 1 minute for your closing statement.
Thank you, Jordan. I really want to say that education is near and dear to my heart. Being an educator myself, at the university level, different format, but just being able to bring some of my experience in, I think that students absolutely positively deserve a well-rounded quality education, the best that we can absolutely provide for them. I really want to focus on these really big issues that I think we're being faced with as a school board, which is funding and advocating for more funding from the state, teacher recruitment and retention, keeping class sizes smaller. That does impact outcomes. And that's really what we should be focused on, is those student outcomes and making sure that, again, that they do have the skills for moving into the future. And I look forward to taking my very diverse and eclectic career path and hopefully bringing that experience to the school board.
Thank you, Brittany. That concludes the school board portion of tonight's forum.
Thank you. Thank you, school board candidates, for being here. Now we'll turn to the new City Hall ballot proposition. The city is asking voters to fund a new city hall through a $27 million bond. It's the only proposition on the ballot this year. Last year, voters narrowly rejected the city's request to borrow up to $35 million for the project. The Assembly put $10 million toward the project this spring, reducing the size of the bond. The project is expected to cost $43 million. The city's preferred location for a new city hall is 450 Whittier Street, across the street from the State Museum. A real estate consultant hired by the Assembly found there are no existing commercial properties that could fit all city staff without displacing other tenants.
Joining us for a discussion on the City Hall ballot measure are Rory Watt and David Ignell. Rory is Juneau's outgoing city manager. He's retiring at the end of this month after 7 years as city manager, and he's worked for the city for 30 years total. David was born and raised in Juneau. He has spent most of his career working in commercial real estate and recently authored a book on the Alaska Investigative Grand Jury. He's joining us remotely tonight through Zoom. This discussion will have a slightly different format than we've had for the school board and assembly candidates. This time we'll go back and forth, asking the participants different questions. Each person will have 2 minutes to respond to each question, and our goal is for this to serve as a discussion on the issue, not a debate.
We'll start with David Ignell. Do you think a new city hall is a fiscally responsible project at this time? You have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Clarice. My answer is absolutely not. I think it's completely fiscally irresponsible. I guess in talking about the numbers, there are some critical errors in the city has been throwing out there. The first one is that the new city hall is estimated to be $43 million. Back on May 3rd of this year, there was a memo that was sent from city staff to the Assembly through Katie Coaster. And they said that basically the estimates that we've gotten in the past aren't worthwhile because the bids are actually coming in anywhere from 1.5 to 1.8 times the original estimate. So, for a $43 million new city hall, what we're really talking about is $65 to $80 million. And from there, it just gets worse. Financing costs double. The other critical error is that the city is claiming that we saved $820,000 in rent if we own City Hall. But that analysis is critically flawed. That $820,000 is really only $270,000. The remaining $550,000 are operating expenses. payments for heat, electricity, insurance, maintenance, janitorial services. The city has to pay that whether somebody else owns the building or they own their own building. So the numbers are just completely flawed, and this whole project, and the city knows this. Mr. Watt and the City Assembly know this.
Okay. Thank you, David. Rory, you're next. Do you think a new city hall is a fiscally responsible project at this time? You have 2 minutes.
Thank you. I do. I firmly believe that it is the right fiscal decision. I've worked for the city for 30 years, and over that time, we've rented office space in a number of different locations. We've had staff dispersed around in a way that makes it difficult to collaborate and manage the workforce efficiently. And about 40% of our downtown employees are in the existing city hall, which is a 70-year-old fire station. The building simply is old and wore out. It has a number of maintenance needs. And so the question really is not, should we spend $43 million or save $43 million? The question is, what are we going to do? What makes sense? Does it make sense to invest in an expensive renovation of the existing city hall? And if we talk through what that would be, we would have to move the employees out of the building. I'm not sure to where, disrupt the workforce, disrupt service to the public, undertake an extremely expensive renovation of the building, $14 million. Probably take a couple years, probably have to block off the alleyway, figure out how to have a contractor stage there. And then we move the workforce back in, and we would still be renting in 4 other locations. Those locations are not sustainable rental situations. One of them has had repeated plumbing failures. One has been purchased by Sea Alaska Heritage Institute, and they have expanding programs. And one is proposed for redevelopment. So we have to do something, and the question is, what's the best use of our money? A new city hall is something that we would own together, and we as a community would build equity and own that facility. Continuing to rent means that other people get those profits and other people build equity and get return on their investment.
Thank you, Rory. David, your next question. What do you think is the best long-term solution for the city's need for office space? You have 2 minutes.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. So first of all, I disagree with what Mr. Watt is saying. I think the age of the existing building is irrelevant. You go around town, there are 200 properties on the city's historical database that are probably older than the city hall, but yet in better condition. I'm just going to name a few. House of Wickersham, that was built in 1898. The Imperial Bar and Cafe, where people hang out every day, that was built in 1906. The Filipino Hall, 1908. The Governor's Mansion, 1912. The Alaskan Hotel, 1913. Silverbow Inn, 1914. Capitol School, 1927, which was recently repurposed into office. Baranoff Hotel, 1938. The list just goes on and on and on. So to say that, well, this building is 70 years old and we need something new, it's just kind of a slap in the face to everybody else in Juneau who's made do with these older buildings. The other thing I want to bring up is, Mr. Watt, said, well, there's going to be some interruptions and everything. My understanding is the Gold Belt building. They have 24,000 square feet today of contiguous space, and the city could move their offices of 3 of those buildings into that space in the Gold Belt building, and it has parking. It's in downtown, so there's options. I just feel that we've been, the people of Juneau have been force-fed this dialogue. The city officials have been unwilling to listen. Public testimony in the assembly meetings has been unanimous against this, but they don't listen to us. So I really think that I'm glad to see the facts are coming out finally.
Thank you, David. Rory, your second question. The voters already rejected a bond proposal for a new city hall. Why is it on the ballot again? You have 2 minutes.
Thank you. I think it's a great question. So we put it on the ballot last year, and it narrowly failed. And I think I erred, and I think the Assembly erred in not deciding to publicly advocate for the project. In order to advocate for a ballot project, we have to follow APOC rules, which would require an appropriation, which if you were going to try and influence an election. We didn't do that last year. We did not get good information out. There was a lot of incorrect ideas on social media, and even with those incorrect facts, it almost passed. The Assembly, myself, senior staff, we took a hard look at ourselves, and we own the fact that we didn't do as well as we could have last year, but we can't really stomach the thought of wasting the public's money. I don't want to build a new city hall per se. I want to be better with the public dollar. I want to be a person that makes CBJ a better organization to better serve the public. So knowing that we would be criticized, I recommended that we put it back on the ballot this year. Knowing that they would be criticized, the Assembly voted 9-0 to put it back on the ballot. Because we really think that it is in the public interest. We have a history in Juneau of sometimes not getting our projects right the first time it goes on the ballot. It took us a couple times for the police station, took us a couple times for the Valley Pool, took us a couple times for the ice rink. It's an iterative process with the public. The Assembly put $10 million more into the project to reduce the cost. And the Assembly heard from people things like, oh, well, if I'd known those facts, I would have voted yes. And so we put money forward to advocating. That's why we're doing it again this year.
Thank you, Rory. David, what are your thoughts on the city's role in advocating for this project? You have 2 minutes.
Yeah, thanks, Jordan. I was at the city council meeting over a year ago when this issue first came up before the vote last year. I think the amount was $25,000. And I happened to be in the meeting and I spoke up on it kind of off the cuff. And I said, this sounds like unethical to me. This is there's something that smacks against, the city employees wanting this new building, the city officials wanting this new building, and then using public funds to advocate for what they want. It just doesn't sound like America. And so I objected to that. And by the end of the night, the majority of the city council agreed with me that ethically, they shouldn't be spending the money. So this year, it's a real head scratcher because now it got increased to $50,000. Public testimony against that was unanimous. I mean, there were several people who went down and testified against that. And now we're just in this really weird space where, I was talking with one of the ladies from, the League of Women Voters, and she said, normally we would have the city come in and explain both sides of the bond issue, or of the proposition, but we really can't do this. This is kind of weird space. So yeah, here I am. I'm debating, Mr. Watt on this issue. I'm a volunteer. He's paid. It opens a huge can of worms, Jordan. And and I know that there was an offer. There's a group in Juneau, First Things First, and they tried to get equal opportunity on this. Okay, well, let each side spend $25,000, and the city turned that down. So it's a one-sided street. It's wrong.
Thank you, David. Rory, the project's estimated cost is more than $43 million. How would the bond affect Juneau's residents' property taxes, and what happens if the project exceeds that estimate? You have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Jordan. So there's already $16 million that the Assembly has appropriated, and the question before the voters is bonds yes, bonds no for an additional $27 million, getting to about $43 million. I think it's sufficient funds to build the project. We've hired a professional cost estimator who looked at it. The estimate is something, it's nearly $1,000 a square foot, which is a lot of money. It's true that construction pricing has been seeing big inflation. It's true that construction pricing can be unpredictable. We're proposing a design-build procurement method where we would lock in a price early, negotiate with a contractor to get a fixed fee for a building. If we couldn't get the scope that we need for $43 million, we would work to value engineer the project and figure out how to bring a project home for that. And that might be a slightly lesser structure, or might be a longer performance period, or a variety of things. I think that there is sufficient funds to do the project. We've looked at it, and we've added contingency factors in for both construction cost and for furnishing the facility. So we have not been trying to sell blue sky, as I've been saying, and reduce the estimated cost to try and get voter approval. It's the result of estimating from private sector consultants, inflated for inflation for when we think the project would go into construction.
Thank you, Rory. David, you're next. The city has already put $16.3 million toward a city hall project. With so much funding already committed, why do you think it would be better to abandon the project? You have 2 minutes.
Well, okay, let's look where that $16 million came. People across the board, homeowners across the board in Juneau this last year have seen their property taxes increase anywhere from 15, 20 to 30% across the board. The last 2 years, we've seen significant property taxes, and lo and behold, I think it was $6 million the year before, and now $10 million, and lo and behold, the city says, well, we got $16 million, so yeah, voters, we know you didn't really mean, that you didn't want this, $35 million bond, so we're not going to take money out of your left pocket, but we're going to take money out of your right pocket. And so, this $16 million is hurting a lot of people. Ken Kelch, Ken was my high school English teacher. Okay, I got a lot of respect for the guy. And, he wrote an op-ed or an opinion article back in March it was. And he said the increase last year was the highest in the percentage and dollar amount that he's experienced in 55 years living in his home. People are having to leave Juneau because they can't afford this. So that $16 million, that's the taxpayer money. Give that back to taxpayers. I mean, I could go on for probably an hour about this. The issue of new city hall ties directly into these increased property taxes. And I've talked to people all over Juneau this summer, from the left, from the middle, from the right, and everybody's upset about this. So, we've got so many problems. We've got, education, public safety, living affordability. If we're not going to give the money back, let's put it in the pockets of the people rather than spending $100 million on luxury office space.
Thank you, David. Rory, why has the current city hall accumulated more than $14 million in deferred maintenance, and how would the city maintain the new facility and avoid such costs in the future? You have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Clarice. So we've gotten into this situation because we have not been able to come up with a renovation project that made sense, that provided value to the taxpayers. So for years, we've struggled with the question of what to do with City Hall and what to do with our rental spaces. And we started a project just before COVID to contemplate a new City Hall. Of course, we got derailed a couple years, and then we picked the project up again. During that period, we've looked at renovating City Hall, and it's this cascading series of things. And it's like, okay, well, if the carpet is wearing out and we want to replace the carpet, there's asbestos in the mastic, so we'd have to tent the building off. And if we're doing that, we should replace the wiring because a lot of the building is ungrounded, and the heating system is inadequate. One side of the building freezing, the other side of the building hot, and the roof is leaking. So there's no easy way to phase that work in. If we cordoned the building off and we did a quarter of a building at a time, we would just be making it even more expensive and making it drag out even longer. As it is today, City Hall costs more to maintain and operate than Augustus Brown Pool. It's an extraordinarily expensive building to own and operate. We take care of it and we run it, but we haven't done the major maintenance because it's never made sense in use of public money, and it's in that context of having those other spaces as well. So the question really is, what's the big holistic move that is best for the citizens of Juneau? Could we do a renovation? We could. Would it make sense? No. Would the public get value out of a renovation? No. Would we keep spending money on rent? Yes.
Thank you, Rory. David, this is your final question. If the city doesn't build a new city hall, what should the city do with employees when the Municipal Way and Sea Alaska Plaza leases end? You have 2 minutes.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I think I answered that previously when I talked about the Gold Belt building. 24,000 square feet of contiguous space. There's going to be some efficiencies of scale. I mean, you know, I spent most of my career in commercial real estate finance. And, you know, we would underwrite these deals. We would look at leases. We would look at these things. And if you combine 3 places into one, you're going to have efficiencies of scale. So I think the answer is present. But I want to talk about, you know, I want to go back to what Rory was just talking about. You know, I communicated, I exchanged a number of emails with Mr. Watt back in May and June. And I was like, you know, I'm so tired of looking at these pictures in the paper and online that show the peeling paint and the rot. And, you know, the city officials have allowed our city hall to become an eyesore. And all it would take is just a few $1,000s of paint and caulk to make it look good. So, you know, I almost feel like they're doing this on purpose. You know, they want our city hall to look as bad as possible. So in the hopes that, you know, they'll get people to vote for a new city hall that will save us $270,000 of dollars of rent in year, but will cost us $4 million. By the time you look at the construction cost overrides, by the time you look at the increased financing costs. I mean, you know, spending $4 million a year to save $270,000, that's insanity. So, you know, the solutions are there. The city officials are making this thing a whole bigger thing than it really needs to be. There's a simple fix. I think it was Nano yesterday who said 5 of that 14 million is for TIs, tenant improvements. So we have an option.
Thank you, David. And a final question for Rory. If the ballot proposition does not pass, what will the city do when the Municipal Way and Sea Alaska Plaza leases end?
Thank you for that question. You know, I think we're just going to have to figure out what to do. So the assembly and the staff at the time will have to figure out what the next best move is. I mean, I'm not doing any contingency planning on what if the ballot measure fails. I mean, I think we've made a good faith effort to put the information out there and make the case for the project, and I firmly believe that's the right thing to do. I think the Marine View building is probably the most tenuous of our rental spaces. We just got notified that they're going to shut down the water again for a couple days, so we either have to send everybody home or get hand sanitizer stations and porta potties on the sidewalk. I mean, that's just a simple fact of where we are. If we have to move, there is, as the other speaker acknowledged, one space in town that has a little over 20,000 square feet, and that might be a viable option for some of our offices. But that would just be delaying the consolidation and delaying the benefits of a centralized workforce, and it would be delaying the benefits of the public being able to go to one place, and it would be delaying the benefit of the public eventually saving money by building a new city hall. So the economics show, and this is by a private economist, that eventually a city hall pays for itself. Over the long term, once you extinguish the debt costs, we save money over the rental situation, and the building actually pays for itself. So building a new city hall is the one thing that Juneau can do that funds itself over time. Everything else we do is an ongoing cost, is an annual public service that we provide: police, fire, road maintenance, whatever, education. So that's the situation we're in.
Thank you, Rory. That concludes tonight's forum. Thank you to our school board candidates and our City Hall ballot discussion participants. And thank you to those of you who joined us for tonight's forum. If you missed part of it, you can find the full video at juneauempire.com, KTOO.org, KINYradio.com, and JuneauLWV.org. You can find more local election coverage, voter information, and candidate profiles on those websites too.
Thank you to the League of Women Voters for co-sponsoring this forum with KTOO, KINY, and the Juneau Empire. And to voters, be sure to return your mail-in ballots on or before Election Day, October 3rd. Starting tomorrow, ballots can be returned by mail or dropped at a secure ballot box at the Douglas Library or Statter Harbor. Starting Monday, they can also be dropped off at City Hall or the Mendenhall Valley Public Library, starting Monday. You can also vote in person through Election Day at City Hall and the Valley Library.
Mail ballots must be postmarked by October 3rd, and ballots brought to drop boxes must be in by 8 p.m. on the 3rd. You can find more information on the city's website, juneau.org/elections. Thank you, and good night.